art&York Online 2021. So introductions first. I'm Emily.
And I'm Victoria.
So over the next 3 days we're going to introduce all of our fantastic artists to you in video form. So first up in our artists exhibitors list we have Vinegar and Brown Paper. And Andy Poplar is the creator of Vinegar and Brown Paper, and he is an etcher. Now you'll see from the image that he uses text wisdoms and interesting ways of looking at the world, and then etches these sort of witty sayings onto vintage objects.
Yeah, he uses beautiful typography, and I think one of the real skills that Andy has is using appropriate typography to go with the saying and to go with the object. He does use a lot of glass objects, but he also does etch onto metal surface as well, using a traditional glass etching technique. So you've got this juxtaposition of language and object.
Then next up we have Adele Carmazine, who is a photo montage artist.
Yeah, this is quite an interesting one because for those of you that don't really understand what photo montage is, but it's the idea that you take maybe old photography and new photography that she's created and blending those things together using also digital art. And she creates beautiful imagery, and it really does blur the lines between the landscape of dreams and reality.
They really do, and we've always said about Adele's work that you feel like you can almost fall into them. They really feel like sort of a story that you just want to really dive into and find out more about and understand the characters in each image. Really beautiful work.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things, if you had one of her pieces on your wall, it'd probably be that every so often you had a new interpretation of what it actually means. Next up, we've got Amy Stubbs. Amy is a surface pattern designer, and the way that she utilises her surface patterns in terms of things that you might be able to buy is quite varied. So she goes from creating big pieces of fabric that you could use for curtains, that you can incorporate into dresses. Also, she makes her own cushions, lampshades, scarves, things like that. And her eye for pattern is absolutely wonderful. And she has such a great sense of colour and style and shape.
She does, and she creates all of her patterns by hand painting or collaging designs together and then working with these designs digitally to create repeat patterns. Really intricate work.
It is.
Next up we have Angus Vasili, who is a screen printer, and Angus creates screen prints, also moving into collage as well now, which is really interesting. And each piece has a real architectural quality to it. So he uses a lot of brutalist architecture imagery, and then sort of prints and weaves together the photography, the printing and hand finished elements as well to build up this really rich layered surface.
And what's lovely about his work is that you can go from having a piece that's this sort of scale that maybe could fit into lots of different people's homes to having something that's really got a lot of size to it. So head over to have a look at Angus's work and also spot his use of colour, which is fantastic.
It is.
So our next artist is Anna Cook, and she is a paper cut artist, which basically means that she takes layers of tonal paper and cuts them in a really intricate way, evoking scenes of wildlife. So on the surface, her work looks like a 2D piece of work, but actually it's 3D. So these layers of paper, as you can see here on this image, it's got real depth to the picture. And actually, although we're looking at a static image here, if you'd got one of these pieces on your wall, if you just moved a few millimetres one way or the other, you'd see a different perspective of the picture because of these layers. She's very much inspired by the wildlife such as owls, foxes and birds, and they're all set within a framework.
Really, really beautiful work. Next we've got Anna K. Baldwin, who is a jeweller. Now Anna's work is very organic, very tactile jewellery. She uses predominantly silver, gold and semi-precious stones. And you can see here in these images these close-up shots of the hammering techniques that she uses, which really create movement and texture across the surface of each piece. They are really wearable pieces as well, so we always say they're kind of like everyday jewellery that you could just comfortably wear every day. She works to commission, and she also does bridal pieces too.
Our next artist is Anna Marie Magson, and she is a ceramicist, and she creates vessels, hand-built stoneware pots.
She does, and she does that by layering coloured slip onto slabs of clay and then building those up into three-dimensional pieces. And we both really love the palette, the colour palette that she uses on her pots, and they've got a real soft hue sort of colour palette which makes them feel really calming. She also incorporates gentle, simple mark making over the top of these colours, which again really add a really lovely calming effect to the work.
We're going to now talk about an artist called Ben Greenwood, who is actually a sculptor, and he works in classical bronze technique and also in modern day resins. So we'll have a look at a picture of his now. And as you can see from this image, his work is very strong, it's striking, it's bold. And this one in particular, with the two men balancing on this beam or whatever it is that they're up to, it really tells a story. But what I particularly like about the way that he tells stories with his work is that it's open to interpretation. So what exactly is going on between these two men balancing, you know, what would happen if one of them slightly moved, I think is really interesting. He also works at different scales, and he does indoor and outdoor pieces too. And to be honest, I do feel like depending on the size of your house, sometimes what's considered an outdoor piece can look absolutely amazing inside too.
It really can. And another artist who uses, I think, a sense of storytelling in their work is Blotworks. Dan Morrison is a creator of Blotworks, and he is an award-winning artist engineer, which is really interesting. And he creates functional sculpture with a playful, whimsical twist to it. And we've both commented on the fact that whenever anybody sees Dan's work, they just are amazed by the technique and the skill that is involved in creating each piece. Each piece is totally unique, and it can be anything from lighting to a plant holder, and you'll see from this image here that just what you would think of as a very simple piece, which is to hold a plant, actually becomes this amazing working sculpture which wafts the smell of these flowers throughout the house.
The thing about Dan for me and his work, Blotworks, is that it's this crossover of artist and engineer, and it's the skill set that he's got, that he brings precision engineering to incredibly creative, what we're going to term functional sculpture.
Next on our list is Catherine MacLeod, who is a ceramicist, and Catherine creates hand-built figures using crank clay. Now, crank clay is a very rough gritty clay, which when it's high fired really has an amazing textural quality to it, and also almost speckled as those little bits of texture and grit in the clay come to the surface. Her work at the moment is predominantly figurative, and she creates these figures that sit on a shelf, and they can be a single figure or a group of figures, and some of them have binoculars and are looking out, and there's this searching and calling element to each one of them, and it really makes you want to know what they're looking at, what are they searching for, who are they calling to. They've got a real lifelike quality to them. She also uses lithium glaze and red decals, which pick out details and focal points such as the soles of their feet or their bottoms from where they're sat on the shelf, and this adds a really nice element to each piece as well.
So our next artist is Charlotte Morrison, and she is a ceramic artist. As you can see from these images here, it's domestic ceramics. There's something quite beautiful about all of Charlotte's work, and the clean forms and the simple designs that she uses mean that you can imagine that these pieces are also beautiful in their own right. So it can be that these pieces are ornamental as well as functional. So thinking about it in those ways, can be really lovely to have work, the sort of work that she creates on a shelf where people can see the stuff when they're not in use. She's very much inspired by maps and the natural world. So you'll see from the mark making on the surface of her vessels and pots that she's inspired by the colours of the Yorkshire Dales.
She is, and that brings us, last but not least, onto our final artist for this film, and that is Charlotte Whitmore. Now, Charlotte is a mixed media jeweller, and you can see from this image of her work that she creates these pieces of jewellery which evoke plants, seeds and grasses from the hedgerows and towpaths that she walks along herself. And she works with silver and then also uses vintage plastics to bring in this really bold, bright pop of colour in each piece. And Victoria is always saying that when Charlotte does colour, she really does colour. So the vintage plastics have a real vibrancy and almost quite drama to them as well.
Yeah. So that's wrapped it up. We've done our first 12. We really hope you've enjoyed this video. We've been really horribly distracted because we've got building work going on, got people popping up at the windows. So hopefully this has made sense. But have a look on the website. We've covered the first 12 artists in the exhibitor side of the website, and we've got the next 12 coming up at lunchtime. So we'll see you then.
Stay
Bye.
tuned. Bye.